Hello, and Frank Thacker here, and greetings to all, and welcome to the Daily Peacemaker. Today's episode, we're going to focus on the fourth, fifth, and sixth principles of Kingian nonviolence, and to set a little context for those who are joining us for the first time, and welcome to those that are joining for the first time, and I'm a little sad you haven't showed up before, but then on the other hand, I'm very glad that you showed up for this episode. But anyway, so our philosophy is basically if we're going to create a culture of peace, it's got to come from the bottom up, from people like you and I, and it's got to be grounded in nonviolence. So, given that philosophy, we have found that if what's really helpful is to have a model of nonviolence, what it is, the ins and outs of it, a model, a philosophy, whatever you want to name it. And we found that the Kingian nonviolent steps and principles are very, very helpful. They sort of provide a container for how you're living your daily life and helpful ways to look at how nonviolently you're living over a period of time. So there are six principles and six steps. The last episode we did was on the principles 1, 2, and 3. So now we're going to do 4, 5, and 6. And what we use is a highly video has received many rewards and has probably three of the most top-notch nonviolent trainers in the country, providing that do the video and talk about these steps. And I'm only kidding. It's just three, myself and two other people that do it, and it hasn't won any award. So, but just to get you enticed. But I don't want to come off like people saying, "Oh, this won an award. I can do better than that." But anyway, so we'll. The other piece is the video is a little bit long, and you can obviously. What a lot of people do is watch it or listen to it in sections. 10 minutes here, 15 minutes there. Or you can do the whole thing, and you'll probably be so enthralled and enticed by once you get into it, you won't be able to stop until you get to the end. But no, I'm only kidding. One of the things though, watching this is it does take some patience and some endurance, and both of those are helpful qualities as we try to live this daily life of nonviolence. So just to let you know, it's a little bit longer than some of the other ones. And what's that? Oh, one of my buddies is saying, if it's so long, why don't you stop babbling and get it going? So that's probably a good idea. So let me see if we can do this. Do the screen share, and then go up to Files. It's in Google Drive. And now we're going to share it over here. And then comes up, we're going to connect to Google Drive. We're getting there, so hang on. Be patient. So we go here, and we want principles 4, 5, and 6. And we go with that. Let anybody see it, and go to shared screen. We're almost there. Patience, and here it comes. Share. And this guy always keeps appearing up here. Let me see if I can get rid of him and get this going. We'll get started with my good friends Madeline and Pam as we take a look at the last three principles of Kingian nonviolence. And I'll start with the fourth one, which I found a little convoluted sentence, but the way it usually comes out is accept suffering without retaliation for the sake of the cause to achieve a goal. Let me read that again. Accept suffering without retaliation for the sake of the cause to achieve a goal. So I'm going to try to take that apart. I would start with, actually at the end, the notion of achieving a goal. So in any action, whether it's nonviolent or violent, you have a goal, an end, something you want to accomplish. So in the civil rights movement, the goal from my perspective was establish racial equality. If you're on a football team, say, the goal is to win the game. If you have a falling out with a relative, your goal might be to reestablish that relationship. So the goal is, sometimes it takes a while to really get a hold of what is your end game here? What are you really trying to achieve? So then, for the sake of the cause, I had a hard time with that because they almost sound the same. For the sake of the cause and the goal, it's almost like the interchangeable, you know. But I would substitute the game plan. How are you going to achieve the goal? You know, what's your game plan? Like in the civil rights, a lot of the plan was, from my perspective, to engage or I'm not sure the right word, but to act against what they felt were unjust laws and to do it in a nonviolent way. And that was part of that was to raise people's consciousness and those issues. So there was a lot of, that was the plan. Here's the goal. This is how we're going to do it. And flipping back to the beginning, if you're going to do nonviolent, if your plan is nonviolent, or take football game, even a football game, if your plan is to win the game, and maybe the plan is to not take any unnecessary penalties, that might be part of the plan. So then you go back to the beginning, suffering without retaliation. And most people, when they hear that, they go, what? Suffering without retaliation? If someone does something to me, they deserve to have payback. So it's that almost a natural, from way back, survival brain. You know, if you cause me pain or harm, you deserve what you get back. And then other people will look at that and say, suffering without retaliation, that's a victim. You want people to be victimized and fall into that role. But it doesn't say suffering and do nothing. It says suffering and don't retaliate, which means basically getting revenge, getting back at that other person. And so it doesn't say suffer and be a victim, and just keep letting people beat up on you in various and sundry ways. So then what do you do when someone, when you feel someone has harmed you? Physically, when someone harms you physically, it's pretty graphic. But when you feel offended by what someone said about you, or they tricked you, or they told lies about you, what I try to do is, first of all, ask myself, well, why does that offend me? what in me got hooked by that, if anything? So that's one thing. Look at your own inner workings when it's um, a non-physical attack. Um, and another thing is even whether it's physical or psychological, is being able to ask yourself, why does that person feel the need to do that? Where were they harmed? Um, in terms of what would cause them. And try, you use the word love, you got to respond in love. And to me, that's a great idea. But what does that mean in everyday life? You know, so there is a way of not responding with your own violence and revenge. And I think the one of the key things to remember about this is you're not going to get to the place where you are totally able to accept suffering without retaliation. It's going to take a while. So the goal for me is always to do a little bit better in that area of accepting the suffering without retaliation. It also doesn't mean don't have feelings about it. If someone harms you and you get angry, that is fine. It's okay. It's natural. The question then is, what are you going to do with that anger, that energy that you have? Are you going to use it to motivate yourself to even stay nonviolent? So there's a lot of complexity to this step, a principle. Probably to all of them is a lot of complexity. And another thing that enters into this is the ability to be patient and to persevere. You're learning how to act nonviolently in these situations. And if you accept the suffering, there's an energy that gets communicated, I think, to the person that's doing the violence to you. It's hard to explain, but I find it hard to explain. But there is an exchange, and there are plenty of examples where a person has threatened to use violence, and the nonviolent person accepted it, and the person said, "Oh, there's a classic example of someone, I'm thinking that civil rights, excuse me, where someone was going to attack them with their knife if they didn't get out of the chair, and the person said, "Well, I'm not going to move, but if you have to do that, go ahead." And the perpetrator, if you will, was like, "Well, they just couldn't do it." So there's an energy conveyed there. So let me stop there, and if either Pam or Madeline have responses or questions, great. If not, we can move forward with the next one.
Well, I think Martin Luther King's people, and that I always had that vision of them sitting at the table, at the counter, and having, food poured on their head.
Yeah.
And and they accepted that because of the goal that they were reaching for. And they knew that if they responded, their goal would not be reached, not the way that they would want it to be reached. But it doesn't, it's nothing that you can do without a lot of soul searching training.
Yes.
Working together in the community. I mean, all these things go against what we would naturally do. If somebody poured coffee on our head or whatever, what's our natural instinct is to get up and give it back or whatever, push another way. But they were trained not to do that. I think that's an enormous feather in their cap. I'm always intrigued when I see those pictures. So it can be done, but it is not the natural reaction for it.
Yeah. And even on a more personal level, if you have a dispute with a neighbor or a family member, you have to be somewhat aware of your own feelings and be able to control them, and continue to try to deal with that person in a nonviolent way. There's a whole program on nonviolent communication by Rosenberg, which is a whole way of, on a personal level, trying to heal a relationship or make a relationship better. So it does take a lot of work, whether it's a global, a mass movement or individual. And again, it's that trying to be a little bit better today than you were yesterday. So.
Yeah, and another thing, Frank, as you're talking about personal or a more global goal, it's all very much tied up together.
Yeah.
So when I think about the young men and women who sat at the lunch counters and endured the insulting behavior of people around them, in some cases actually doing at least some physical harm to these people, if they were to fight back, then the goal that they're after, which is to be treated as in an equitable way, would have been overwhelmed by the visual of two people fighting against each other. So, the ultimate goal is to be treated equitably. They're using the lunch counters as a way to, as a battle line in a certain sense, but not a violent, from your end anyway, not a violent battle line, but a moral battle line. And as long as they engage at the moral level, then the battle becomes clear to everyone. As soon as they engage in a physical level of retaliation, it's not the same battle that they were originally fighting for. It becomes just a spectacle for people who are used to seeing people fight with each other. So I do see that difference between the goal. The goal is to be treated equitably, and the what's the other word, Frank?
The cause, for the sake of the cause.
The sake of the cause. Okay, so the cause is to be treated equitably. The goal is to basically highlight the day-to-day inequity that people experience, so that it can be seen and so it can be confronted and dealt with at a moral level, because the physical fighting is not going to achieve the objective, the long-term objective.
Yeah.
So,
Challenging.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'll go on to principle 5, because it is a very interesting and complex, like everything else, but definitely something we should strive for. And principle 5 says that we need to avoid internal violence of the spirit, as well as external physical violence. And when I break this apart, I understand the external physical violence. If you're a non-violent person, it's very clear that you should avoid external physical violence, fighting back, insulting back, or whatever. But the hard part, I think, is to understand what is meant by internal violence of the spirit. And it gets, I think, to a very deep moral issue, is about that you have to understand the consequences of the attitude that is in, say you're in a campaign to bring about change. That attitude has to be pure, I think, is the word I would use. that there isn't the retaliation in your own heart, the hatred in your own heart, the dismissal of that person as human in your own heart. That's internal violence of the spirit, when you hold all of that. And I think we don't even realize that, that happens easily. It's very hard to, it's about forgiveness, you know, which, you know, we've learned, at least I've learned over the years, that forgiveness is just as important to the person who needs the forgiveness as it is to the person asking for forgiveness. So when you hold that grudge for so long in your heart because you don't want to go to that person, or maybe you've gone and they don't want to forgive you, but if you can forgive them in spite of it all, then that takes a lot of a load off of your heart, off of your spirit. And that is healing in itself. It's not an easy thing to do. I see it all around me. And, you know, people who, especially in families where there's been some disagreement, or someone said something or ignored somebody, and they just hold on to that anger and resentment for years, you know, and not forgiving. And the person who had that happen to them is probably suffering even more than the person who did the deed, because they've probably gone on and forgot about it. That person holds on to it. So it can happen, I think, in a one-on-one, or it can happen in a greater venue, like when you're working within a campaign to bring about change, or I think it's just one of those things that we, as a true nonviolent person, we can't, I'm going to say shoot our opponent, but I mean harm our opponent, but we also have to refuse to hate that person.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And for, especially right now in today's world, which is January 8th, 2020, you know, looking at the situations that have happened over the last few days, it seems very easy to hate the demonstrators that moved into the Capitol and just, you know, defaced and defiled that space and threatened the lives of other people. There's a lot of rhetoric out there that these people are hateful, and using, a lot of commentators using words like thugs and terrible ways of describing them. And yet, as a nonviolent people, we're called to love them as human beings, not the acts that they're doing, but the fact that they are human beings, and whatever it is that they believe is what they believe. So we're looking to see the good in that person. That's the only way you can preserve the community. Otherwise, we have this splintering of the community, and that really we're about seeking the good of the people and the community, and bringing the community back together, whether it's a family unit or a national unit or a world unit. You know, there is this real need, I think, to what, I don't know if it's only Christians, but what we call agape love, which is that love that is understanding and redeeming the goodwill for all. Big thing to live up to, I think, but really worth it, I think, to learn about and think about, and remember that we have to live together no matter what. We have to live together. And if we see everybody as our enemy, and that they deserve to be hated, then we will never have a beloved community. So even though we see to see other people, many people maybe as our enemies, we still have to treat them with love and understanding, and not hate them, which is a big order. So I think you need community to do that. You need your own people who are nonviolent like you are, to talk it through, to talk about your feelings, to help you, because it's not easy to come to that place where you can love your enemies and want only good for them.
Mm.
So, I think that the spirit and morale that people had during the civil rights was to bring this, to bring the internal violence of the spirit, to cure that. I don't know if it's cure, it might not be the right word, but to recognize that that is going to keep them from their goal. That if people harbor all this violence in their heart and in their spirit, then the goal of a united community won't happen. So they did a lot of work, I think, through music, community action, working together, being together, encouraging each other to be able to do this very difficult principle of avoiding internal violence in the spirit. So I think we've got the external physical violence. We understand that better. I do. The internal violence of the spirit is one that I think is a constantly for me anyway, thing that I must work on, and understand, and pray about, really. So.
I love that, Madeline, that idea of praying about it. It's like taking a moment to have all of that experience of all those feelings and thoughts, and just being with it and praying for, I don't know, the forgiveness or the wisdom to deal with it. I agree with pretty much everything you said, but I build some of it out a little bit and say, yes, that forgiveness. I love that notion of forgiveness and the way Dr. King had a phrase or a sentence. Hating someone is like taking poison and expecting the other person to die.
Yeah. Did he say that? I know that.
More harm than it is to the other person.
Yeah.
But that does say something about, okay, you have, it's natural, it's human to have angry feelings about somebody who's hurt you, or who's hurt someone you love, or hurt an institution that you love. So there are feelings that come up from that. And I don't think the only thing we do with that is to just forgive the other people. I think there are two other things we do. Number one, manage our own feelings. We need to acknowledge that we're not wrong to have feelings, but we do want to manage those feelings in a way that they don't drive us unconsciously to do some action that we would regret. So number one is that. I'm forgetting my other thought. We have to manage the feelings. I've forgotten what my other thought was.
Well, sort of as you attempt to recollect that thought, I would add one of the things that sort of arose within me as you were talking, Madeline, is the notion of like in this particular situation that's just happened in our capital. So a number of those people that were storming the Capitol, they were doing something illegal, and at least from the perspective of the law and that. And now people, whether maybe with the president calling, he's got to resign or be impeached. And on the surface, those are fairly understandable issues, where people are calling for him to be impeached, or, the people that stormed the Capitol for them to be arrested and prosecuted now. But I wonder if the people that are calling for that, if there isn't underneath that sort of so-called legitimate call a real anger, like those sons of a bums, they're gonna get what they deserve. And then you appear to be fairly rational because it makes sense that they should suffer the consequences. So because how do you, this is a rhetorical question, how do you deal with someone that's broken the law or really harmed you, and there's consequences to that, how do you enact those consequences or try to enact them and still have a compassionate attitude towards that person? Because I think you can do both. I like the word compassion in this case better than love, even though they're sort of similar in many ways. You know, compassion is like really having, from my perspective, a feeling for that person and what they might have gone through in their life and what they might be about to go through. So that's to me, that's I don't know a better word in how to say be compassionate and at the same time work to have these people suffer the consequences of their actions. You know, and that would be true in any situation.
Yeah, well, you know that many people who are in prison, of course, are there because of violent acts. And then when you look at their background, what they lived through as children or were treated like as, young adults or whatever, you can understand their lashing out. And I think it's true even with demonstrators. I can understand why they did what they did. I don't agree with it, but what their information is sending them in that direction. So there should be some compassion for the fact that, I feel they're misled, but they still are doing it in their spirit of what they think is right.
Right. And that's right that they're misled. And I think the folks who are misleading them are culpable in a much larger way in a certain sense. But it also goes back to each individual that they have chosen their information sources. They have chosen to believe what they believe and not believe, whatever, and to act in certain ways on those beliefs. There are lots of places on that route where they might have made other choices. So it goes back, Frank, to what you were saying a little while ago, and I'll use the word accountability. I mean, we can be enormously compassionate for people who have made choices that just don't work for the health of our society on the one hand, but on the other hand, people need to be held accountable. And what does that mean? It means knowing the facts of what they did, having very specific information that they and everyone can look at that says, okay, this is what happened. This is what you did. These are our norms. These are our laws. And the consequences are this. And even Dr. King talked about that. He says, when we violate the law, the way we're doing it, the reason we're doing it, suggests that we have the highest respect for the law. It's not that we don't think the law's we don't have respect for the law. We have respect for the law as it's written, but we also have respect for that higher law, the law, the sacred law of I don't know, maybe your religious sense of right and wrong.
Yeah, and they mentioned in the suffering piece without retaliation, if you're going to enter into a mass movement type thing, you might want to consider how ready you are to die. Never mind go to prison, which is bad enough. So it's but I don't know how to say this, but I feel in a way that, and I don't know how this fits in, but people that are upset and annoyed at what happened in our capital are judging those people as doing wrong. So we're looking at it from our perspective. You go back in history, this country was founded on a violent revolution.
Yeah.
So it gets very complex. And I've found that whenever I take a position, and I think this is part of nonviolence, I also try to take the position that I might be wrong. But I have to, as best I can, stand in my own truth, for lack of a better word, but at the same time, be open to what the other side is saying. I suppose the one bias I have is you don't have to use violence. That's probably the, if you think the government, in this case, there was cheating and fraud and all that stuff, you don't have to use violence to address it, even though most people will say, and I can even say with my bias, I may be wrong. Maybe humanity is not evolved enough to right wrongs without some violence sometimes. So I don't know. It can just kind of like spin around and get really deep. But I guess the bottom line is to hold people with love and compassion in your heart as best you can.
While you hold them accountable for their actions. Both things.
Yes,
Otherwise,
but it's accountable based on what? On our laws, so the when you go back to the civil rights movement, the civil rights people were breaking the law and they were willing to be accountable to the consequences of their action based on the current laws.
That's right.
So that's
they felt it was unfair, and these people
Yeah.
feel it's an unfair law.
Unjust.
Yeah, unjust, right, but, but they're not willing to take the consequences.
Well, we'll see.
yeah.
We don't know.
Yeah. So anyway,
Well, we should move on.
Are we on?
yeah. Yeah,
All right, we'll give you the hard one.
Okay. Well, I love this principle, the sixth principle in Kingian nonviolence. The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. And the reason that I love it is because it requires so much grappling to understand the meaning of it. And in fact, all of them do actually require a lot of grappling, but this is often the toughest one for people that are new to this to grapple with. And because there's a lot of evidence against it at first glance. Like, really, the arc of the moral universe bends towards justice? I can give you a lot of examples where that is not what's happening or what happened. But there's another thing Dr. King used to say, which I think belongs in tight connection with this principle, and that is that change doesn't roll in on the wheels of inevitability, but comes through continuous struggle. And so I think when Dr. King articulates this principle that the universe bends toward justice, he's not saying, well, if you sit around and twiddle your thumbs long enough, justice will inevitably arrive. He's clearly not saying that. I think what he's saying is that sense of justice is inherent in the human spirit, and we can recognize something about what justice is, and we have an innate internal sense of desire, knowing what it is and desiring it. And there's energy behind that. So if we live in this world together and we see instances of injustice, there's something inside of us that is called upon and that brings out our best selves to try and make that difference. So when the universe bends toward justice, he's talking about the hearts of human beings actually bend toward justice, and the human family bends toward justice. Even little kids have some sense of what's fair and what's not fair. Little kids.
Probably more than adults.
Well, life gets complicated with the older you get. And the fact is, when we're children, we expect our environment. Many children, not all children grow up in a relatively fair environment, so I don't want to say too much about that. But a lot of children grow up in an environment that fundamentally has a sense of fairness to it. Once you get to be a grown-up, you find out that doesn't automatically happen. And you need to participate in the generation of justice. So, yes, the arc of the moral universe is long. We have a lot to learn, and we're still learning how to do it, but it bends toward justice.
Okay, we ramble on a little bit more, but I think I'll stop there. Hope you enjoyed it. As you can see, as we kind of rambled along, it can get pretty complex. And going back, and I think one point is we're trying to get the principles and the steps more to where you can apply them in your everyday life. A lot of some of the things we touched on were more global, if you will, or more around movements and demonstrations and that. And those are obviously very important. But also we want to keep trying to get it back to how we can use these principles and steps in our own individual life. So it gets a little complex there from time to time. But I hope you enjoyed the presentation. And at some point in the near future, I think we'll go back and look at these principles, especially just one at a time, and really try to give examples of how they can be used in everyday ordinary life. And given that, again, we'd love to get input from you people in terms of questions or points or points of view, observations, those types of things, which we can incorporate into our future episodes. So I think we'll wrap it up there. We're doing it episode 6 and we're with 4 parts. So this is the second part. And the title is basically Living into the Beloved Community, which is really about you and I building this beloved community. So another point that I mentioned before, the steps and principles, if you go to the website, and I hope you do, dailypeacemaker.com, in the resource page, there is a place where you can download the 6 principles and 6 steps. So give us a visit, send us an email. You can call, leave a message. Really like to hear from you, especially since we're all doing this together, trying to build this beloved community. And it's good to keep in mind that the arc of the universe, the evolution of creation, if you will, does move towards justice for all. And it's hard work. And in a sense, it's pretty much up to us if we're going to get there. So with that, may your day go well, or your evening, wherever you might be, and peace. All right, you take care. And we'll go over here and end it also. Take care. Bye. Thanks for listening.